It's December 26th at 8:40 p.m. and I want to take a look at the coming panic of 2023, next quarter. So first of all, I want to look at reality in the Ukraine. This is Judge Andrew Napolitano and Colonel Douglas Macgregor reporting on what the current situation is there.
Spend time talking to people on the ground over there to the extent that I'm able. And more interestingly, within the last few days, I've had the opportunity to sit down and talk to some individuals who are recently returned from Russia, Ukraine, Poland. And they've all told me the same thing, that it's not just a question of Putin's approval rating, which is up in the mid 80% range. It's more than that. The recruiting stations for the Russian army are chock full. People are volunteering to fight in Ukraine. The support for him and for his policy inside Russia is overwhelming. So I think that's one reason why it's all fanciful. The other reason is very simply this. Once you move past Europe, particularly Western Europe and North America, the rest of the world is largely aligning with Russia and its strategic partner, China, and increasingly now also India. So you're talking about the rest of the world that doesn't see the urgency under any circumstances to damage Russia.
You know, it's funny you mention India, Colonel, because I've noticed that President Biden seems to be spending a lot of time with Prime Minister Modi of India as recently as yesterday. What is he offering him and what does he want from him?
I don't know. I think what he'd like him to do is obviously join this anti-Russian crusade that the Biden administration wants to lead on the economic and ostensibly on every level. And I don't see that happening. India has a long-term relationship with Russia that goes all the way back to its declaration of independence.
Okay, that's just a sample of the insanity of fantasy world that America is living in, and the notion that Biden is going to go over to India and talk to Modi when he's a full-fledged member of the economic alliance of the BRICS countries, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. A few months ago at the Eurasian Summit, they were all photographed together and embracing one another and smiling because they were making that announcement to the G20, to the other countries, many of whom are aligning with them. So it's just a reality check. I just want to look at that, the disconnect of Americans living in this media bubble that's self-reinforcing, where what's happening in the Ukraine is just as Doug Macgregor described it, is the Russians are on the verge of a full frontal assault on the Ukraine with massive military that is ready to go into action with this. They've been waiting for the arrival of this wintry condition that we're, oddly enough, and I see everything as supernatural, that this is a sign of what's to come, that this is God showing the U.S. that global warming, really, you think your scientists know what the weather is going to be in 2 weeks, much less 2 decades? So all your policies, this global warming Laudato Si initiative of Pope Francis, you really think that your scientists, your puny nobody men of science and religious leaders know who God is and what God is capable of doing? And this is the worst freezing storm frozen tundra. I was mentioning this, I don't, it was less than a year ago, maybe something like that, to this friend I have, that because I was looking at weather patterns and it showed that there was every chance that certain patterns move in unpredictable ways, and we could have a new ice age. Back in the 70s, all the scientists predicted a new ice age because there were 3 years in a row. And I remember growing up where I was buried under snow as a kid. So the scientists thinking it's beyond absurd to me that anybody listens to a bloody scientist. I mean, when have they ever predicted anything? I'd like to know, I really would, as comments in the description box, when they predicted anything, when they've gotten anything right, which wasn't, now they've got, like I said last night, that they've got 10 different dimensions. There are 10 realities, including, I guess, black holes and antimatter and the weak gravity and quarks and bosons and the God particle and everything you can possibly imagine in the mind of a physicist. But where are they? Well, they're not naked to they're not visible to the naked eye in the naked city. But what's visible to my naked eye is our cities are crumbling, our infrastructure is crumbling. We're not building anything back better. That's hogwash. We're sending all of our $1.7 trillion budget. Who's that for? Electric car infrastructure and green technologies, and to cancel our oil industry, and our strategic oil reserve is thrown away to keep gas prices low temporarily, while the alliance between OPEC and Russia is cemented along with Venezuela. So where are we going to get our oil from? Why doesn't somebody ask this in the press? Well, I know very well why. Anyway, the coming panic of 2023, there's going to be a real estate market crash resembling the 2008 crash. But this crash, which is going to occur in the first quarter of 2023, will be far worse than the one 25 years ago. This is due to the fact that not only is the underlying U.S. economy weaker today than it was in 2008, but its relationship to the other world economies is also weaker. On top of that, America has locked itself into intractable global military adventures where their former threats and sanctions are being ignored and dismissed out of hand by countries who have seen just how incompetent and aimless the U.S. military has become under their zombie-like commander-in-chief. That Americans themselves can't see this is what has locked in the next stage of the globalist agenda to destroy the American middle class. America's isolated position in the world, which is dramatically worsening, as our former NATO allies are currently forming a formidable trading alliance which the U.S. is excluded from. This is completely unrecognized by the patriotic fantasy Hollywood media. While the unstable debt market is on the verge of imploding, the propaganda machinery continues on with laughter and happy talk. In fact, it's the optimistic fantasies that were behind the 2008 crash, as well as the 1929 crash, and similarly will lead to the 2023 crash. Americans have been conditioned by constant imaginary fantasies coming from the Treasury, Biden White House, the Fed, mainstream financial analysts. It's obsessive money talk and the entirety of the military-industrial complex that the fundamentals are sound. Not only is victory against the global enemy led by the dastardly Putin in sight, but the Fed has things well under control, and all we face is a slight correction in the market and some modest belt tightening, after which we will head into another cycle of prosperity. The media won't even recognize that we're in a recession and continue to promote the myth that even if we enter one, it will be mild and short-lived. They refuse to use the word. 2/4 of negative GDP is traditionally, that's what constitutes a recession. As long as we decide in the Newspeak Truth Ministry Bureau not to use the words, or to use different words, or call it an imaginary recession. This positive sentiment is identical to the period leading up to the 2008 crash. Mass psychosis has long been characteristic of the USA, but has grown to ever greater heights with the invention of handheld fantasy devices. By mass psychosis, I simply mean the inability to distinguish between physical, factual reality and the vanity narratives broadcast round the clock on screens and residing in the memory banks of Americans that watch this programming day in and day out. In 2008, I was telling everyone around me that we were on the verge of a major housing crash and was treated as if I was a crazy person. The same situation applies today. I've spoken with hundreds, if not thousands, of my fellow citizens over the last 3 or 4 years, none of them having any idea whatsoever what I'm describing. Nothing in their minds has really changed much. You just make your adjustments. There's nothing, at all that changed over the last 2 or 3 years of any real significance or that will have any impact in the future. Most Americans live in pseudo-religious fantasy worlds that are based on nothing more than self-help style nonsense coming from a guru, a pastor, or their financial advisors. This is why I believe with near certainty that we are headed into a Great Depression crash, unlike anything Americans living today have experienced in their lives. They can't even conceive of the possibility of this happening. They go to the movie theaters and watch it day in and day out. I mean, they've created it, watching the very movies that depict The Walking Dead and the zombies and imitating The Sopranos and imitating every kind of dystopic horror nightmare that they're plastered all over their walls and that they go to the clubs and drop their ecstasy or methamphetamines or whatever and pretend that the good times are always going to be here because, Uncle Joe Biden is going to keep handing out checks. America as a country is suffering from personality disorder narcissism. It believes that no matter how catastrophic the decisions making of its leaders, their utter incompetence or the utter failure to deliver any of the promises they continually make and also boast of fulfilling. How about that Obamacare? Isn't that the greatest? Seniors now pay for they used to have free medical coverage before Obamacare came along. And now they pay premiums, they pay, they have donut holes where they go bankrupt if they get a serious illness. They lose all their property. That's socialized medicine. It's the same thing in Canada. It's the same thing all over the world. That's Bernie care. But you listen to the media and this is, we've got, God, thank bless that we have the Democrats. I don't know what we would do without them. Anyway, that there is no possibility that America will suffer the consequences that all other nations in history have faced trying to maintain an overextended empire on the backs of taxpayers who have been ruined by the burden. They have a magical belief created and sustained by Hollywood media that their lifestyle is the gold standard that all other nations envy. And that if those nations don't conform to our directives regarding being run by proxy governments set up by Americans, they will suffer the consequences. Unfortunately, the other nations that in the past have suffered the consequences of refusing to bend to America's dictates are no longer inclined to do so. Meanwhile, the American U.S. Congress, as I said, just passed this 4,000-page, $1.7 trillion budget. And that's the nail in the coffin of the American working class. The belief that money grows on trees, particularly the tree of knowledge of good and evil, is firmly ingrained in the American psyche. There's also the unquestioning belief that Americans are the source of all good on planet Earth and that America has never acted anywhere abroad with anything less than pure and unselfish motives. We refuse to acknowledge that diverse cultures and ethnicities in other countries might prefer to do things the way they have always done them traditionally and don't want to be members of the bright and shining citadel of Washington, D.C. as vassal states, more or less. One has only to contrast the Kremlin to the White House in 2020 to see which government is beloved by its population and which isn't. Here's a picture of the Kremlin. Notice there's no troops. There's no I don't know if anybody's been in Washington D.C. lately. I live outside it. Here at the Kremlin, there's no graffiti. There's no troops. There's no security fences. People are moving about freely. There's no protests. There's Putin has his 80% approval rating. Here's the White House. At the same time, this is the riots encourage. People are throwing Molotov cocktails. They burn down a church. They're all with the approval of the American media. And what are the crimes being committed? Well, they're all sexual relationships going on. Russia collusion, all these things were disproven or never proven. All these things that people, that Trump is a fascist, and Trump's was never a fascist dictator. How could he be a fascist dictator? If he was a fascist dictator, he'd still be in office. Just like this guy is how long is he going to be in office? I would say that the Democrats are never going to be out of office. That's my belief that this is a permanent government, and it's a military, industrial, FBI, CIA, spy state. Everything's what I'm saying now is being monitored. I don't vote anyway, so I'm of no consequence, but I never have been of any consequence. I'm as in the Psalms. I say peace, but everyone around me wants war. So I'm unable to dissuade people from the foolishness of our Roman Empire ambitions. What set the stage for this economic collapse began with the riots of 2020. This was a period when Americans, with the vitriolic hatred of liberal media outlets for Donald Trump, were cheered on to violent destruction of the business districts of major Democrat-run U.S. cities. These riots were described as necessary and healthy expressions of free political speech. The vast majority of Americans either accepted this lie as the truth or just went merrily along with it so as not to upset any of the members of their social network happy family who might possibly be offended. God forbid anyone in America should challenge the belief that the path to racial equality, peace, prosperity, and justice will be accomplished by burning or looting small businesses and assaulting and shooting people. Burning and looting, closing churches, everybody in lockdowns, smashing statues, destroying the founding fathers' statues, not just the Confederate soldiers, Thomas Jefferson, George, everybody, all of our founding fathers are persona non grata in the Democratic Party. It's a takeover by the communists. Not to think that this isn't the Communist Party running the socialist, communist, national socialist, communist, capitalist party. In economic reality, small businesses account for 43% of GDP, along with creating 2/3 of new jobs. In political reality, what these working class socialist revolutionaries, not that they're working, accomplished was to destroy the formerly prosperous small businesses who are the employers and backbone of the working class that they don't want to belong to because they don't want to work. They want to be superstars. The only thing that has allowed this fictional prosperity to maintain the semblance of reality we see around us today is that the Federal Reserve Bank keeps printing dollars for the U.S. Congress to pass around to college kids in student loan forgiveness and similar pork barrel spending that only serves to further inflate the debt bubble. Over the subsequent 2 years, since 2020, the crime and anarchy sanctioned by liberal media proceeded to finish the job begun by the media-backed rioters. The rioters were set loose by the liberal Democratic mayors by telling the police to let the criminal class destroy and take as much loot as they wanted, lest they risk a criminal being injured on his way to his Lexus with a bag filled with designer jewelry or designer clothing or electronic goods or whatever they took. Bizarrely or absurdly, there was a limit under, if they kept under $1,000 or whatever the fee, the number was in California and San Francisco, they just get on their calculators and make sure they stayed under the limit, and then they walk in, loot the store, and walk out. I mean, this is government by the insane for the insane, and it's had predictable results. This criminal class is composed of extremely efficient drug gangs communicating via cell phones and social media. In other words, all the police or FBI needed to do was monitor the cell phone and social media of the criminal class and arrest them when they showed up to loot the businesses. Isn't that the case? I don't know. It seems to me that they have the capability to stop these criminals, since they're monitoring, including this, and can monitor anybody. So I'm not in a criminal gang, but everybody is being monitored. It's just criminals have been so far sanctioned to carry on as you wish. So there's good reason why the murder rates are up. There's good reason why mass shootings are going on at malls and then, outside of nightclubs and everything else. That's the state of lawlessness that prevails when the man of lawlessness is set to arrive. Americans are delusional if they are thinking that there is any kind of white horse who is going to ride to their rescue if civil order, or rather when civil order breaks down. I can watch this happening over the last 2 days, today in upstate New York, and wherever the ice storm is hit. The government and Fed itself, along with the national security state, are the agents of middle class destruction. The American middle class somehow imagined that destroying businesses of their own middle class people was going to miraculously redound to their benefit, along with global warming being defeated by teenagers gluing themselves to art museum walls. If you want to be a celebrity on social networks, wear up in a clown getup and then go into the Getty Museum or one of the museums where you can go to multi-million-dollar paintings and glue yourself. All that's allowed. Nobody goes into a museum like that undetected. I used to go into the museums to draw, and if I take a pen away. If you're 15 feet away from the artwork you're watching, you get this far from the security barrier, and an alarm bell goes off, and the guard rushes over in 2 seconds and is, wrestles me to the ground or whatever. It's all bullshit. This is all staged. Everything in America is, Okay, don't believe me. I'm crazy. Like I say, that's my role in America is to be the crazy person who's mentally ill and hallucinating, living in his own dream world. While other people are like, smooth operators, smooth operators. Looking at that video footage of the winter bomb cyclone storm in New York State, there were people looting the Family Dollar store, going in and out with bags full of provisions. Uh, all right around there, a block over, everybody, it's in a suburban neighborhood. There's nobody in sight. This is what's going to prevail when civil order breaks down. The cops aren't going to be there. The emergency medical services aren't going to be there. This is 37 some people frozen to death in absence of EMS or police anywhere. They're buried under the same snowstorm. And in this kind of emergency or anarchy, they flee. The police don't go anywhere near these riots. They've been told not to. So when we have this outbreak of violence, which I'm anticipating, when the market collapses, that's what we're going to see, because we've already seen it. We saw it in Canada. We see it in Australia. We see it here. It can't happen here. Remember this Frank Zappa song or the Sinclair Lewis book? It can't happen here. Well, it's happened here. When are we going to wake up? Oh, we're woke. So now, as we are entering the third year of the government and media-sponsored anarchic destruction, it just continues unaddressed and unabated. Liberal media, still using the exact same boogeyman, Donald Trump, continues its frontal assault, maligning anyone not on board with the radical socialist agenda of the Biden administration. Yes, I'm a white fascist. I'm a white fascist. I surrender, officer. I was set up by these people to be arrested. So I know what it's like to be on the other side of this kind of police state where they target a person, myself, for having white skin and being old. Never having voted for a Republican in my life, incidentally, being one of the few protesters against the Iraq War in Washington, D.C., where all my fellow liberals I worked with don't go to protest it because they were for the war. I just have to keep reminding everybody that the New York liberals were gung-ho on the front lines for the war against Saddam Hussein, headed by the coalition of the 40 to 50 willing countries, George Bush and Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. The liberal press could licked up and down Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney and George Bush, and Bob Woodward wrote the book on the commander-in-chief, the decision points and all this. Then it becomes a fact. Oh, so nobody, I don't remember. No, I wasn't for the war. I'm against the war. Yeah. Okay. So much for that. Going back to 2008, but who remembers? The housing collapse occurred in an environment of relative peace and prosperity. Okay, we're back in 2008 now as my memory shifts back. This is why I see the 2023 collapse will parallel the 1929 crash, but will be worse. As I've just stated, we're in an anarchic, armed madhouse. The 1929 crash also precipitated a war between the communists and fascists, here as well as in Germany and as well as in Europe, France. Communism, the abstract expressionist painters, that we all love so much, the Mark Rothers, they were all communist. Jackson Pollock was a registered communist. Philip Guston, they were all communists. They were hardline communists from California. Where else? Guston and Pollock were from Southern California, the great ones. But in 2023, the communists are themselves the fascists. In plain language, the people in power are the National Socialist Party of 1939 in everything but name. They hold dictatorial power, with the president and his military declaring wars unilaterally without informing either Congress or the American people. Of course, if they did, the American people would simply shrug with indifference, being they're too distracted and busy watching The Simpsons or Walking Dead reruns. And why would they be interested in something completely irrelevant like World War III? Americans haven't opposed any war since Vietnam. The same generation that opposed the Vietnam War surreptitiously turned into the patriotic Ronald Reagan administration after they saw how well Reagan's flag-waving positivity played with the American people. Bill Clinton, anyone? The great triangulator, Bill Clinton with his Republican Dick Morris. And we long ago became a fully hypocritical left. There is the left in this country is the Ronald Reagan Hollywood liberal left. You know, Tom Hanks is a leftist, and Alice Cooper is a leftist, and Alice Cooper plays golf with Donald Trump and is part of the Las Vegas Rat Pack. You know, Sammy Davis and Jerry Lewis and Clint Eastwood, and all of it's the same thing. It's two sides of the same coin. You can use it's like word salad, you know. So Barry is a nationalist in the same style of Ronald Reagan, who he claimed was his favorite president. And he's socialist in the style of his mentor Saul Alinsky, with rules for radicals to have him, be the implementer of the Great Reset from the World Economic Forum. Get ready. The socialist element is the Big Brother Orwellian security state that, oddly enough, Americans themselves identify with. This is a condition referred to in psychological terms. That's the world I come from, is the psychoanalytical world. I'm an expert on the psychoanalytic world. This is called Stockholm Syndrome. Prisoners develop a positive attitude toward their abusers or captors over time, particularly if their captors let them have all the drugs they want and 24/7 internet porn and exciting Hollywood bloodbaths. What else is there to life? Just like the National Socialists of the 1940s, America is dependent on continual war with its profits from manufacturing military equipment, and if not using it for its own purposes, others are given the benefit of what we manufacture. All this courtesy of the American taxpayer. That's what the terrorists, quote unquote, used to fly into the World Trade Center or defeat our military in Afghanistan. We trained the Mujahideen, the CIA trained the Mujahideen, and they did a good job. They sure kicked ass of the Russians and then of the Americans. So we have to look even more so the Americans, because the Russians knew it. The Russians, I'm sorry to be unpatriotic, but the Russians are a lot smarter than Americans. They know enough when they have lost to get the hell out and lick their wounds and don't go back in. We just stay there hemorrhaging money and blood and other people's blood. That's why Americans don't complain so much. It's just a bunch of Afghans killing themselves. We just push the buttons. The Russians go in and fight on the front lines. The Russian generals have been killed in this war. They're in there fighting with their troops. And where are our generals? They're not going anywhere near General Petraeus. General Betrayus, as I call him. He's in his little harems. So we have to look, and he's the one pushing the war. He's backing this farce in Congress, where Zelensky shows up and you throw another $47 billion or whatever it is, but who's counting? So we have to look at exactly how much American citizens are benefited as funders of this continual global war machine, just how the wheels have come off the bus as the survivors of those wars living in America today are set to fight it out to the death for what's left of a bankrupt country addicted to junk food and computer games. In 2008, we have to look at the foreign wars we were engaged in. This was the 5th year of the disastrous Iraq War, which had long since been lost. But given America's inability to ever admit defeat, the war would go on for another 3 years before America would finally exit from the useless, destructive carnage. The war benefited nobody except the military and prison industrial complex, to mention the drug manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies and hospitals and that's where we get all our bio robotic people now. With science, you put people back together. These are the people worshipped by the media watchers and by the creators of media, without whom life itself would have no meaning. What also occurred in 2008 was that Russia reincorporated Georgia into the Russian Empire, which it was historically a part of. In fact, Joseph Stalin himself was born in Russian Georgia. The Russo-Georgian conflict was the beginning of the Russian Empire reconstituting itself under the central government in Moscow. This was the first military engagement in Europe in the 21st century. It was undertaken by Russia as the beginning of its march to restore the country's loss to the Russian Empire when it was disbanded by Gorbachev in the treaty with Ronald Reagan. And that's what's presently occurring in Russia today. In other words, America has been wasting and throwing away hundreds of billions of dollars in futile wars of choice, while Russia has been building up its military and industry from the ruins of the former Soviet Empire that America disbanded. America has been turning itself into the former Soviet Union, along with voting in communists like Bernie Sanders and Antonio Ocasio-Cortez. One day, Bernie Sanders is the great friend of the Sandinistas and the Cuban Fidelista communists, comparing their great education system and health care to the U.S. as being superior to ours. The next day, why doesn't Bernie go live in Cuba is what I wonder, since they're so superior, or down in Nicaragua. The next day, he's declaring war on them as dupes of the evil Putin. This is the schizophrenia I'm talking about. It's like, how many masks do these people wear before anybody sees that they're completely incompatible? And Miss Cortez and her followers seem blissfully unaware that compared to the treatment of slaves by the white male oppressors in the Congress, known as our founding fathers, at least they didn't slaughter the entire population of the Americas who refused to work for them as slaves, like her namesake, Hernan Cortez. He did this to the indigenous people of present-day Mexico. Nobody remembers the Spanish conquest except Neil Young. I don't know. But the Hispanics aren't slaveholding racists, just white people. Go figure, right? That's how it is in history today. You just leave out all the other crimes against humanity of the Chinese and of the Japanese against the Chinese and of the Germans against, and it's white people. They're the real racists. Guilty as charged. How is it that the Hispanic slaveholders of the Americas, and we're talking about all through the Incan Empire, what was the Incan Empire in Peru, and these people were just slaughtered and turned into slaves to build the Catholic churches, and it's still pagan by and large. So how is it that these slaveholders in the Americas aren't included in the manuals of critical race history, racial theory, whatever it is, identifying white people as systemic racists? That's all due to American mass psychosis, or as George Orwell would call it, down the memory hole, or newspeak, where whatever telegenic people with exuberant and enthusiastic fanaticism scream bloody murder about the fascist, and this is automatically true in the minds of the drugged out or uneducated viewing public. Yet when it comes to bombing and invading their countries, like sending in the Marines to Haiti a couple weeks ago with full approval of Democrat voters opposed to American gunboat diplomacy, the way to handle that contradiction is to simply not report it in the news. In 2008, America was able to get away with these contradictory and self-destructive foreign wars and foreign policies. This isn't the case in 2023. It can no longer get away with presenting itself abroad as a Christian nation bringing democracy, freedom, and the gospels of Jesus to the barbaric peoples of the earth with their barbaric belief systems. This might be playing well to the American masses, glued to the latest episode of The Chosen, or the story of the leader of the Jesus freaks of the 60s, starring Kelsey Grammer, but it isn't playing well with the Eastern Orthodox Christians in Russia, the Saudi monarchs, the Chinese, Hindus in India, the PLO, Iraqis, Afghanis, and we also have to include nearly the entirety of Generation XYZ, the anarchists, the punk rebels, the far left nihilists, particularly the ones currently engaged in revolutionary criminal activity, the drug dealers, the drug gangs, all of which have been prescribed for them to engage in by the Biden administration, along with the radical left on MSNBC and so on. A house divided will not stand. 42 minutes. So this is the social backdrop of civil war that stock market optimists are placidly pretending doesn't exist in order to maintain this all-important positivity. The imaginary media created fantasy world bears no resemblance to the drugged-out zombification of Americans living in the wreckage left behind by the epic destruction that continues to go forward as we hear daily reports of new mass shootings. PTSD veterans, many of whom are drug addicted, form a large percentage of the afflicted, and they have been offered nothing more than empty words and platitudes from these new left zealots living in splendor now. AOC is what, $19 million richer? You know, performing as a socialist. When is the money going to reach Americans living in poverty? I want to know. Instead of the psychoanalysts and the social workers, and you know that's the class living in these expensive houses, are the psychoanalysts. Like, what good are they doing? I think they should take the psychoanalysts and put them on the street and put the people on the street in these expensive houses. That would be my solution. I think that would work really well, because the psychoanalysts are on the same drugs themselves. It's a carnival of self-reinforcing misery. Okay, move. I gotta stop. You know, I'm like Gerald Celente. You know, calm down, Celente. Moving to look at the financial picture as it exists in December 2022, there are already 300,000 Americans underwater on their mortgages who bought homes this year. In 2008, interest rates came down. In 2023, interest rates are going up. We're seeing major corporations like Twitter and Meta laying off tens of thousands of employees from high salary jobs. Many of those laid off are among the 63% of Americans working from paycheck to paycheck with no savings, barely able to pay off the mountain of debt they're buried underneath due to surging inflation under the last over the last 6 months that is always underreported by half. Americans are continually assured by the cheerful, positive, upbeat media in the person of Corinne LaPierre that inflation is under control, the economy is strong as hell, in the words of Joe Biden. However, in the real world where people have to pay their own bills, there is no end in sight to them, and they know this. The lies from the White House are now so threadbare and repetitive that nobody even listens to them, although paradoxically, given American schizophrenia, they believe every word that comes to them through the mainstream media, all the time claiming they don't. So we have massive layoffs of upper middle class workers who are the backbone of the prosperous suburbs with their vastly overpriced homes in relation to regular salaries. Commercial real estate is crushed. The big box stores cannot make rent. In cities like New York, skyscraper buildings are largely empty, when prior to the lockdowns they were full, with the anchor stores closing down at the malls. The small businesses that are their satellites who depend on them are closing as well. Many malls are for sale, looking to be demolished in order for big investors to build apartment complexes in their place. This is a clear sign that the American middle class is kaput, and what is meant by Biden's Build Back Better slogan. This is the plan of Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum materializing before the eyes of anyone paying attention. The announcement of the systematic dismantling of the middle class goes back to the beginning of the destruction in 2020. Klaus Schwab wrote his book outlining why this socialist Great Reset was a necessity for human survival. It's no coincidence that the media created riots and the destruction of the small business community began the same year. Klaus Schwab's book was titled COV blank D-1, The Great Reset. The pandemic lockdowns were designed from the outset in order to advance this World Economic Forum agenda where people would no longer own their own property. Instead, they would become a renter class with guaranteed universal basic income, which Klaus Schwab, along with the rest of the global leaders from Pope Francis to Bill Clinton and Larry Fink of BlackRock in the Clinton Global Initiative, assures everyone will lead the citizens of planet Earth to utopian happiness. It's also notable that at the 2016 WEF meeting in Davos, Switzerland, Joe Biden gave the keynote address, which outlined the future that he is presiding over from the Oval Office at the moment. Isn't it astonishing that the very person in command of the world as we know it today, ordering this war and that war, we're threatening China now. The last day we've made threats against China, and China is flying planes into over Taiwan at the moment, thanks to our threats. And shutting down American oil industry to make way for electric cars, while handing out billions for the electric car infrastructure, he's in the exact same place predicted by the WEF global community a bare 9 years ago. Anyone who thinks an organization capable of electing a confused adult with senile dementia to rule America isn't capable of fulfilling the goals outlined in the New World Dystopia by Klaus Schwab and his chosen brain, Yuval Noah Harari, I suggest they think about this a little more carefully. The 2016 meeting was attended by 2,500 leaders from business, government, international organizations, civil society, academia, media, and of course the arts. That's where it all comes from. It's the arts. This is your brave new wonder world, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Under the theme, Mastering the Fourth Industrial Revolution. In 2023, mastering, notice that? the master race. It's the language is impeccable, isn't it? I mean, if you can't decipher this language, really, I mean, it's in your face. Fourth Industrial Revolution, Fourth Reich. In 2023, Americans will face the implementation of this program that they foolishly, like lemmings walking toward the cliff, are fully embracing, with TV talk show fans laughing and cheering wildly at every appearance of Yuval Noah, the techno messiah. They apparently have little to no idea that they are, in his eyes, the useless TV watching eaters that he has on many occasions said need to be eliminated in order for a more advanced and evolved human species to emerge that will rule over the planetary system as they go forth via SpaceX to colonize Mars before venturing on to the rest of the galaxies. Meanwhile, back on planet Earth, what I envision is a purposely manufactured crisis in the first quarter of 2023, leading to a full-scale panic as the housing market collapsing brings down the stock market in much the same way that happened in 2008. This will create the emergency conditions that we saw in 2008, or I saw anyway. I don't know who else saw it. We're a team of the best and brightest people of planet Earth from the Joe Biden administration, naturally. These are the same geniuses that gave us the 2008 new plan for a great economic, like Eckhart Tolle, plan for a new Earth. We have Eckhart Tolle should be the head of education, or Oprah. They're rolling out their CBDC. That's what I envision, the central bank digital currency, reassuring everyone that while their fiat currencies are no longer worth anything, there's an entirely new system of credit they've been working on, along with government handouts of cash that so many people have become used to being handed out to them the last few years, so they can go out and riot. They get paid so that they don't have to go to work, but they can go and burn down business districts or sit at home and watch TV. People stranded in $500,000 to multi-million-dollar homes will overnight have seen all their accumulated equity gone up in smoke. Tens of millions of unemployed and homeless people, including the 5 million the Democrats allowed to pour into the country, will eagerly climb on board the life raft offered by the magnanimous Joe Biden and Klaus Schwab. The promises of the socialist revolutionaries who elected the Democrats to feed and house everyone, give them health care, free educations, driver's licenses, voter registration, and jobs, maybe fighting our enemies abroad and within, everything will be fulfilled as promised. This is the Great Reset, or Fourth Industrial Revolution, as Klaus Schwab put it. We will own nothing, and we will be happy. You will possess nothing. It's a mantra. It's a just have that tattooed on your forehead along with the mark of the beast and the third eye, and watch your gurus, Russell Brand or whoever they are, and the awakening ones rising up in glorious wonder, watching, I don't know, mud wrestling. Anything is possible. All right, God bless and good night, and over and out to all the lonely people out there. I pray for the people that are suffering through this winter storm, and I pray for all of the people that are homeless tonight and those without hope, that there is hope in Jesus Christ. With all of this happening, this is a call from God. This is a call from God to come to your Savior, Jesus. And that is the one refuge in the time of this kind of oncoming storm. there's only one refuge. Over and out.